The year was 2023. The sky above Rikers Island burned orange. Sirens wailed from every corner. Inside the world's most notorious jail, chaos had broken loose. Inmates pounded on cell doors, screaming for help. Guards were trapped in locked corridors. And somewhere between the East Facility and the George R. Virno Center, a fire was spreading. The power had gone out. Generators failed. Emergency lights flickered, then died. For the first time in decades, Rikers Island went completely dark. Helicopters hovered overhead, searching for an escape route or maybe a rescue. But no one knew exactly what was happening. Some said it was a riot. Others whispered it was a planned protest. But what the public didn't know was that this night was the night that sealed Rikers Island's fate. Because by morning, New York City officials would make a shocking announcement. Rikers Island was finally shutting down. But why now? What happened that night that forced the city to finally say, enough? To understand the truth behind Rikers' shutdown, we need to go back to where it all began. Rikers Island wasn't built to be a nightmare. When it opened in 1932, it was supposed to be a symbol of progress, a modern jail to replace the old, crumbling prisons in Manhattan. But over the decades, that dream twisted into something darker. Rikers became a city of cages, 10 different jails built on a swamp between Queens and the Bronx. It held over 10,000 inmates at its peak, many who hadn't even been convicted of a crime yet. Some were there just because they couldn't afford bail. Inside, violence was constant. Fights broke out daily. Guards and inmates lived in fear. And stories of abuse, neglect, and corruption leaked out year after year. Still, the city ignored it. Until one case changed everything. His name was Kalief Browder. He was just 16 when he was arrested in 2010, accused of stealing a backpack. No trial. No conviction. Yet he spent 3 years locked up on Rikers Island, most of it in solitary confinement. He was beaten by guards, jumped by other inmates, and when he finally got out, he was never the same. In 2015, Kalief took his own life, and that was the moment America finally looked at Rikers and asked, how could this happen? Celebrities, politicians, activists, everyone wanted answers. But change didn't come fast. Even after investigations, reports, and promises, Rikers stayed open. Because closing Rikers wasn't easy. It was massive, dangerous, and deeply tied to the city's justice system. Still, the pressure kept building. And by 2019, New York's mayor finally announced a plan. Rikers Island would close by 2027. But as the date approached, the problems only got worse. By 2022, the jail was in chaos. Staff shortages, broken equipment, and rising violence turned the island into something out of control. Guards were quitting. Inmates were dying. Reporters called it a humanitarian disaster. Even correctional officers said it was unsafe for everyone. And then came the blackout. The night everything fell apart. A small electrical failure spread through the power grid. Backup generators failed. The control systems froze. Doors wouldn't open. Security cameras went dark. For 8 long hours, Rikers was cut off from the rest of the world. No communication. No order. No law. When power was finally restored, the island looked like a war zone. Cells smashed. Injuries everywhere. And in the middle of it all, a recording leaked from a guard's radio. A voice said, if we don't shut this place down soon, it's going to collapse on its own. That audio spread across social media. News stations replayed it for weeks. And that's when the mayor called an emergency press conference, announcing that the city would begin the immediate process of shutting down Rikers Island. But what really happened during those 8 hours? Why did the generators fail? And who leaked that recording? Because not everyone wanted Rikers to close. And some of the people fighting to keep it open had everything to lose if the truth came out. The morning after the blackout, New York City woke up to headlines that didn't seem real. Rikers Island goes dark for 8 hours. Inmates run wild during blackout. Mayor promises full investigation. TV reporters stood on the edge of the East River, staring at the island that looked peaceful from a distance. But everyone knew it wasn't. Inside, investigators moved through the charred hallways. Broken lights, burned-out wires, graffiti written on the walls by inmates who thought they might die that night. "We told you this would happen. Close, Rikers." And then one of the investigators found it. A small, black USB drive hidden under a desk in the control tower. When they plugged it in, it contained the original audio recording that had leaked online. But this version was longer. And what it revealed shocked everyone. The recording didn't just have a guard warning about the collapse. It also captured someone else's voice, someone giving orders right before the power went out. A man said, "Cut section B first. Then let it roll through the East Wing." The investigators froze. That wasn't a random outage. It sounded planned. A few days later, a guard named Officer Notorious came forward. She'd worked at Rikers for almost 10 years. She told the city's Department of Investigation something no one wanted to hear. She said the blackout wasn't just bad luck. It was a result of years of ignored safety warnings and possibly sabotage. "We've been filing complaints about those generators since last summer," she said. "But they kept pushing repairs back. Said the budget was tight. Said we'd manage." When the news hit, the city exploded. Protesters gathered outside City Hall, shouting, "Shut it down now." But behind closed doors, not everyone agreed. Some city officials wanted to delay the closure again. They said it would cost billions to build new jails. They said the city wasn't ready. And then someone leaked a confidential report. A report that said the blackout could have been prevented if maintenance had been done just 2 weeks earlier. Now it wasn't just about safety. It was about cover-ups. And it was about to get worse. A few nights later, Officer Torres got a phone call from an unknown number. A man's voice said, "You're making a mistake. Stop talking to reporters." She hung up immediately. But the next day, her car window was smashed. Nothing was stolen, except a single flash drive she'd kept hidden inside the glove box. That same evening, someone broke into the Rikers Island control office again. Files were missing, footage deleted, and the one server that stored generator logs completely wiped clean. The NYPD launched an internal investigation, but even they couldn't explain how so much evidence disappeared overnight. Still, one piece of information survived. A technician who worked the night of the blackout said he saw 3 men enter the generator room minutes before the failure, all wearing uniforms, all carrying keycards that only high-ranking officers had access to. When investigators checked the logs, those keycards were missing, vanished from the system. Something bigger was happening, something that went beyond bad wiring and broken lights. And the deeper they dug, the more they realized. Someone inside Rikers wanted that blackout to happen. But why? What did they gain from shutting down the island's power? And who were those 3 men that entered the generator room that night? As the truth started to surface, one thing became clear. Rikers Island wasn't just falling apart on its own. Someone was helping it collapse. 3 days after the blackout, the investigation team finally gained access to a backup hard drive. It came from a maintenance camera that wasn't connected to the main power grid, one that somehow survived the outage. The footage was grainy, black and white, but clear enough to make out 3 figures walking toward the generator room. Timestamp, 11:47 p.m. Exactly 8 minutes before the power failure. They wore correctional department uniforms, complete with ID tags and flashlights. But when investigators zoomed in, 2 of those men didn't match any employee in the system. No records, no names, no background. They weren't guards. They weren't contractors. They were ghosts in the system. Only the 3rd man had an identifiable face. Captain Daniel Royce, a longtime Rikers officer with over 15 years of service. Someone who was known for keeping things quiet and making problems disappear. When the footage leaked to the press, the city panicked. Royce was immediately suspended, but he refused to talk. Every question was met with silence. Every lawyer he hired dropped out within days. But one night, a journalist from the Daily Ledger named Maya Benson received a message on an encrypted app. It was from an anonymous source who claimed to know why those 3 men were in the generator room that night. And the message said just 5 chilling words. They were hiding the deaths. Maya followed the lead, tracing it to a series of internal Rikers reports that had never been made public. They detailed something horrifying: 17 inmate deaths between January and October that year. But officially, the city had only reported 9. 8 deaths had been erased from the record, and one of them happened the same week as the blackout. The deleted file showed the name Eric Timmons, a 27-year-old inmate awaiting trial for a minor assault charge. His cause of death: unknown medical emergency. But a nurse's unsigned note, hidden deep in the report, said otherwise. Inmate Timmons found unresponsive after altercation with staff. No cameras in area. Ordered to remain off the books. That was the real reason the generators failed that night. The power wasn't just cut by accident. It was killed on purpose, to destroy footage that could have exposed the incident. Maya tried to publish the story, but within 24 hours, her editor received a cease and desist letter from the city's legal department. It warned that publishing unverified information about an ongoing investigation could lead to prosecution. But the damage was done. The rumor spread online faster than it could be stopped. Protesters flooded the streets again, this time with signs reading, "Justice for Eric Timmons. Rikers kills. Close it now." And for the first time, even correctional officers started to speak up. They admitted that orders had been given to contain certain incidents before the mayor's inspection visits. Contain, meaning cover up. When investigators finally brought Captain Royce back in for questioning, he looked tired, defeated. He sat down, took a deep breath, and said quietly, "You think this was my idea?" He told them he'd been following direct orders from higher up. Someone at City Hall. Someone who didn't want bad press, while the mayor was pushing for re-election. Royce refused to name names. But before he could say anything else, his lawyer entered the room and stopped the interview. By the next morning, Royce had vanished. His apartment was empty, his phone disconnected, and his car was found abandoned near the Bronx River, doors open, engine still running. Police searched for weeks. No trace. No body. And with him gone, the city lost its only direct link to whoever had ordered the blackout. But Maya wasn't done. She believed Royce left behind proof, something hidden on the island. Because before he disappeared, he'd sent her one last text message that read, "Check the sub-basement. They buried everything down there." The sub-basement, a restricted part of Rikers that even most guards didn't know existed. Old tunnels, storage rooms, and, according to rumors, places where files went missing forever. What was buried beneath Rikers Island? What secrets did the city try so hard to keep hidden? Because if Maya's theory was right, the blackout wasn't the end of Rikers' story. It was just the beginning of its downfall. 2 weeks after Captain Royce disappeared, Maya Benson sat in her small Brooklyn apartment, staring at his last message over and over again. Check the sub-basement. They buried everything down there. She couldn't stop thinking about it. The sub-basement wasn't on any official blueprint of Rikers Island. But if it existed, it could be the key to everything. The cover-ups, the missing footage, maybe even Royce's disappearance. Then one night, an email arrived from an anonymous sender. No text, just one attachment. An old maintenance map of Rikers Island, dated 1987. At first glance, it looked like a regular layout of the East Facility. Rows of cells, offices, and corridors. But in the bottom corner, barely visible under faded ink, were 2 words written in pencil. Lower-level access. Maya zoomed in. A small tunnel extended from the central boiler room down to a hidden chamber beneath the power grid. That was it. That was the sub-basement. With help from a retired correctional officer named Sam Delaney, who'd worked on the island in the 90s, Maya managed to get an old access badge and permission to visit Rikers for research purposes. She disguised her investigation as part of a journalist documentary on prison reform. But in truth, she was there for one thing: to find what Royce left behind. The air on Rikers was heavy that day. Sirens echoed in the distance. The main yard was almost empty. Delaney led her through a narrow maintenance corridor behind the East Facility kitchen. He whispered, "This place was built on landfill. You'll feel the ground shake sometimes. Don't panic." At the end of the corridor, a rusty door sat half-buried behind crates of cleaning supplies. A faded sign read, "Authorized personnel only, sub-level maintenance." They forced it open. A wave of cold, stale air hit them. The smell of oil, rust, and old water filled their lungs. Maya turned on her flashlight. A long staircase led down into darkness. At the bottom of the stairs, they found a narrow hallway lined with pipes. The sound of dripping water echoed. It looked abandoned until they reached a locked metal door. Delaney used an old key he'd kept since his time as a guard. The door creaked open, revealing a room full of metal cabinets, stacks of boxes, and old tape reels. Dust covered everything. Labels had faded with time. But one box near the back caught Maya's eye. It was newer, marked with a red sticker. And across the front, in black marker, someone had written, "Do not catalog." Inside were folders labeled Incident Reports, 2022. And inside those folders, photos, handwritten notes, and internal memos that told the real story of what Rikers had become. Dozens of unreported assaults, missing medical records, and most shocking of all, an email chain between a senior city official and the warden of Rikers. The message read, "We cannot afford negative press before the election. Contain the incident. Ensure all footage is erased." Attached was a timestamp, the night of the blackout. Maya stared at it in disbelief. This was the proof. The blackout, the cover-up, the missing footage, it was all orchestrated to protect people in power. But before she could take more photos, she heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, echoing from the hallway above. Delaney grabbed her arm and whispered, "We need to go. Now." They turned off the flashlight. The sound grew louder. Voices, 2 men, maybe 3. "Check down there," one said. They said someone accessed the lower level. Maya's heart raced. They ducked behind a pile of old boxes as flashlights swept across the room. Dust danced in the beams. One of the men stepped closer, his boots echoing on the concrete floor. She held her breath. Her phone buzzed once, a notification she forgot to silence. The man froze. "You hear that?" He moved toward the sound. Delaney whispered, "Run on my signal." The moment the guard turned his light away, Delaney kicked over a metal shelf, sending papers flying everywhere. They bolted through the hallway, back up the stairs, as shouts erupted behind them. When they burst through the maintenance door into the kitchen hallway, alarms started blaring. Security radios crackled. They made it to the outer gate before Delaney was stopped by officers. Maya kept running. She slipped through an open delivery truck gate and disappeared into the city traffic outside the bridge. When she looked back, she saw guards dragging Delaney away. He never made it out of Rikers again. That night, Maya uploaded everything she'd found onto a secure drive. Every photo, every email, every document. She sent copies to 3 different news outlets with a simple note. "This is the truth behind Rikers Island." But the next morning, all 3 outlets went silent. Their websites down. Their emails bouncing back. Someone didn't just want to hide the truth. They wanted to erase it completely. And by the end of that week, a new story hit the headlines. Investigative journalist, missing after visiting Rikers Island. 3 days after Maya Benson's visit to Rikers Island, she was gone. Her phone went dead. Her apartment door was left unlocked. Laptop missing. No sign of forced entry. The last security camera footage of her showed Maya walking into a subway station near Atlantic Avenue at 10:43 p.m. She never came out the other side. When police checked the cameras inside the station, the feed between 10:44 and 10:51 was missing. 7 minutes of blank static. 7 minutes. That was all it took for a woman who had just uncovered the biggest prison scandal in New York history to disappear. Her friends tried to contact her editor, her lawyer, anyone who might know where she was. But each person said the same thing. I can't talk about it. Something had silenced them. 2 weeks later, a strange post appeared on an encrypted forum used by journalists. The user's name was Echo77. The message said, "If anything happens to me, release everything." Attached were 3 encrypted files, all labeled Rikers. No one could open them at first. But when a cybercrime unit from Canada cracked the first file, it contained thousands of documents, emails, internal memos, security logs, all connected to the Rikers blackout. Inside one folder was a document titled Operation Containment. It listed several names, city officials, correctional administrators, and private contractors, who'd approved an emergency data purge the night the power failed. The purpose? To remove evidence of unreported deaths and classified footage. At the bottom of the document, one name was circled in red. Deputy Mayor Charles Vance. Vance had been the mayor's right-hand man during the campaign to modernize New York's jail system. He promised to close Rikers by 2027, but behind the scenes, he was doing everything to keep it open. Because shutting down Rikers meant losing millions in private contracts, construction, food supply, security systems. All of it connected to people in power. And now those names were out in the open. The leaks exploded across social media. Hashtag Close Rikers Now started trending in the US, Canada, and the UK. Protesters filled the streets outside City Hall, holding signs that read, "Maya told the truth. No more silence. Shut it down." News anchors questioned how deep the corruption went, how many lives had been lost, and whether Maya Benson was still alive. The mayor called an emergency press conference, promising full transparency and a renewed investigation. But when reporters asked about the documents naming Deputy Mayor Vance, he walked off the stage. 2 days later, Vance resigned. No statement, no apology, and for the first time, the city council voted, unanimously, to move forward with the immediate closure of Rikers Island. Just when it seemed like the story was ending, another file surfaced. This time, it wasn't documents, it was a video, posted on a private server and titled simply, "For the People." The footage showed a dimly lit room, a shaky camera, and a familiar voice. It was Maya. Her face was tired, her voice quiet, but her words were clear. "If you're watching this, it means they tried to silence me. But you can't bury the truth. Rikers Island is more than a prison. It's a machine, one that feeds on silence, fear, and forgotten names. Don't let them build another one. Make them answer for every life lost." The video cut out abruptly. No date, no location. But the world had heard her. The message went viral within hours. And by the end of that week, over 500,000 people signed a petition demanding the closure of all Rikers facilities. The pressure became too much for the city to ignore. The shutdown plan, originally set for 2027, was moved up to 2025. On a cold November morning, with helicopters circling overhead, the gates of Rikers Island began to close for the last time. Inmates were transferred to smaller borough-based facilities. Guards packed their things, and a convoy of city officials arrived to oversee the final evacuation. The once feared prison stood silent, its cells empty, its lights flickering like dying stars. Reporters gathered outside the bridge as one city official read a short statement. "After 93 years, Rikers Island is officially closed. We cannot undo the past, but we can promise a better future." But as the crowd began to leave, one reporter asked a question that hung heavy in the cold air. Whatever happened to Maya Benson? No one answered. The mayor's team walked away. And in the distance, across the dark waters of the East River, the island sat quiet, a ghost of its own history. Some say Maya was killed. Others believe she escaped, hiding under a new name. But one thing is certain. Her story changed everything. Because Rikers didn't fall from one scandal or one mistake. It fell because someone refused to stay silent. And even now, rumors say that somewhere in those tunnels, deep beneath the sub-basement, the rest of Maya's files are still hidden, waiting to be found. It had been 8 months since the final shutdown. Rikers Island was empty now, or at least it was supposed to be. The bridges were closed. The ferry routes were restricted, and only construction crews were allowed anywhere near it. But late one foggy night, a small boat crossed the East River. On board were two people, Detective Aaron Vega, an NYPD investigator assigned to cold cases, and Lydia Cole, a journalist who once worked alongside Maya Benson. They weren't supposed to be there, but Vega had received an anonymous envelope 3 days earlier. Inside was a photo, blurry, taken in the dark, showing what looked like a metal container buried beneath the old sub-basement. And scrawled across the bottom, in faint handwriting, were 3 words. Maya was right. When they reached the shore, the island was silent. The wind howled through empty buildings, rattling broken windows. Rusted signs swung from old chains. Department of Correction, Rikers Island. They made their way through the abandoned corridors of the East Facility, flashlights cutting through the dust and debris. The walls were covered in graffiti, messages left by inmates before the shutdown. We were never heard. Truth buried here. Vega led the way to the same maintenance door Maya had entered months before. It was still there, sealed shut with a steel padlock. He broke it open with a crowbar. The staircase below looked the same as it had in her notes. Cold, dark, silent. They descended carefully, every step echoing through the hollow tunnels. At the bottom, the air turned damp and heavy. The old filing room was half collapsed now, ceiling tiles hanging down, cabinets overturned. But something was different this time. At the far end of the room, behind a wall of fallen debris, a small section of floor looked freshly disturbed, like it had been dug up recently. They cleared away the rubble and found it. A steel box, about the size of a suitcase, sealed with rusted clamps and chains. Vega forced it open with his flashlight wedged between his teeth. Inside were dozens of hard drives, each labeled by year, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2023. And on top of them all was a note, written on yellowing paper. If you're reading this, I didn't make it out. Tell them everything. MB. Lydia's hands trembled as she read it. It was Maya's handwriting. They connected one of the drives to Vega's laptop. The screen flickered to life, then loaded a series of video files labeled archive footage, restricted access. The first video showed what looked like body bags stacked in a dark hallway. No sound. No date. The next showed officers dragging an unconscious inmate across the floor while a supervisor looked on. And the third, a timestamp matching the exact night of the blackout. The footage showed the 3 men entering the generator room. But this time, the angle was different. A camera no one knew existed. One of the men turned to the camera for just a second. And even in the grainy darkness, his face was unmistakable. Deputy Mayor Charles Vance. Lydia gasped. He was there. He was actually there that night. Vega copied the footage, every frame, every file. They packed up the drives and headed for the exit. But as they reached the stairway, they heard something that froze them in place. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, above them. And then voices. They're down there. Don't let them leave. Vega turned off his flashlight. Lydia clutched the hard drives to her chest. They ducked behind a wall of fallen debris as 3 figures appeared at the top of the stairs, each one carrying a flashlight and a sidearm. Private security, but not city-issued. These were corporate contractors, the same ones hired during the Rikers cleanup, the same ones connected to Vance. We can't let them find us, Vega whispered. If they know we have this. Before he could finish, one of the flashlights swept across the room. Over here. Gunfire erupted. Bullets tore through the air, shattering glass and concrete. Vega pulled Lydia toward a side tunnel he'd noticed earlier. They ran, ducking behind pipes as sparks flew around them. They burst through a service hatch that led to the old laundry block and slammed the door behind them. Vega's shoulder was bleeding, but he didn't stop. They sprinted toward the outer yard, the sound of sirens echoing across the island. By the time they reached the dock, their boat was gone. Just tire marks in the sand where it had been. Lydia knelt beside Vega, trembling. He was pale, losing blood fast. But he managed to hand her a flash drive. "Get this to the network," he said weakly. "Don't let them bury it again." She nodded through tears, grabbed the drive, and ran toward the bridge on foot. The fog was thick, her lungs burning, but she didn't stop. By dawn, the footage was uploaded. Every major network received a copy. And within hours, the world saw what had really happened on Rikers Island. The truth spread like wildfire. News anchors replayed the video of Charles Vance in the generator room again and again. Public outrage exploded. Federal agents raided multiple offices across the city. Arrests followed. Cover-ups fell apart. And for the first time in decades, people began to see what Rikers truly was, a monument to pain, corruption, and silence. Weeks later, Lydia stood at the East River, staring at the island one last time. Construction crews had begun demolishing the buildings, one by one. Soon, nothing would remain. Detective Vega didn't survive that night. But his evidence, Maya's files, the recordings, the truth, had done what decades of protests couldn't. Rikers Island was gone, and this time for good. As she turned to leave, a small ripple broke the surface of the water. Something metallic glinted beneath the current. Just for a moment. A camera lens. A tag reading Evidence 24B, sublevel storage. Lydia froze. If that was real, then maybe there was more. Maybe Rikers' story wasn't over yet. They thought closing Rikers would erase its past. But some ghosts don't fade that easily. And some truths refused to stay buried. They built Rikers to hold the forgotten. But in the end, it was their secrets that got locked away. For decades, voices were silenced, evidence buried, and truth traded for power. Yet, truth always finds its way out. Rikers didn't close because of one scandal, one story, or one hero. It closed because the silence finally broke. But if Maya Benson's message was right, then somewhere out there, beyond the rivers and the headlines, another Rikers might already be rising. And the question remains, when the next wall goes up, will we hear the screams this time? Rikers Island may be gone, but the system remains.